In 1972, socialite Barbara Baklin's glittering world came to a gruesome end. One November day, her own son killed her, but it was why he did it that was truly shocking. Barbara Daly Baklin lived a fantasy life of glamorous parties, wealthy admirers, and Hollywood starlets. Her incredible beauty got her into some of the highest echelons of society. But behind that exquisite face, she was hiding a terrible secret, and it was one that would drive her to an utterly gruesome act. This is the savage, tragic story of Barbara Baklin. On September 28, 1921, Barbara Baklin was born as Barbara Daly to a normal American family. Growing up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the young Barbara seemed destined for a well-adjusted life of upper-middle-class contentment. And as everything seemed swell until the year she turned 11, and everything started to change in the absolute worst way. In 1933, Barbara lost her father Frank in one of the most horrific ways imaginable. After losing all his money in the stock market crash, Frank took his own life, funneling carbon monoxide into his car while in the garage. Barbara wasn't even a teenager yet, and she was already facing enormous trauma. And as though that's not bad enough, there's even more to this sad story. You see, Frank Daly wasn't the only family member to suffer from mental health issues. Both Barbara and her mother had psychological demons, with Barbara later employing a series of expensive therapists to help her find some sort of happiness. As we'll see, she only grew more unhinged and with disastrous consequences. Despite the tragedy of her early years, Barbara's life soon skyrocketed. A few years after losing her father, she and her mother moved to New York City, posted up in the iconic Delmonico Hotel. And almost overnight, Barbara became the talk of the town for her big dark eyes and thick head of luscious hair. Soon enough, though, she went from bombshell to scandal maker. Barbara wasn't just pretty, she was incredibly ambitious. Even from a young age, she knew she wanted bright lights, big cities, and a whole lot of money. She also knew she had the guts to make it happen. In the blink of an eye, she was one of New York's 10 most beautiful girls, and one of the top models of her time. So it's no surprise that trouble came knocking. When Barbara was barely an adult, she had the attention of some very powerful men. As a regular on the high society party circuit, Barbara met and started up a fling with none other than John Jacob Astor Sixsix, the fabulously wealthy scion of the Astor clan. Some reports even say that Astor wanted to marry her, but Barbara had her sights set on a different mark. Around this time, Barbara fell head over heels for Brooks Backland, a man people in the know called the intellectual Errol Flynn. Brooks was the grandson of Leo Backland, the inventor of Bakelite plastic, and his family was stinking rich. He had also inherited his grandfather's expansive mind, starting a PhD in physics before switching to writing. In short, the wealthy, dashing, and intelligent Brooks was everything Barbara wanted in a man. So believe me when I say she stopped in nothing to get him. In the 1940s, Brooks and Barbara were getting hot and heavy, but that didn't seem to be enough for our girl. According to one report, she lied and told Brooks that she was pregnant in order to push him into a quickie marriage. It worked, and suddenly Barbara went from hungry social climber to high society socialite in her own right. In the short term, this was everything Barbara wanted, and the long term, though, this would lead to all-out carnage. From the outside, Barbara's life now had all the trappings she could have ever wanted. She and Brooks bought an extravagant apartment in New York's Upper East Side, and they frequently entertained all manners of luminaries, from Hollywood starlet Greta Garbo to Torment and playwright Tennessee Williams. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Everyone knew Barbara loved all that glittered. Money, status, her own beautiful face. But they quickly found out that she had an ugly side too. Dinner guests noted Barbara's emotional instability, her occasional vile manners, and her excessive drinking. Indeed, many of the couple's friends hoped they would never have children in case they risked passing their dysfunction onto the poor kids. In 1946, Barbara got pregnant for real this time, giving birth to a baby boy she named Anthony. At this point, both Brooks and Barbara were cycling through depressions together, had engaged in several affairs, and were generally miserable. Guess what? A baby didn't fix those issues. In fact, new ones just started popping up. As young Tony grew into his toddler, the Baklin heir started to exhibit some disturbing signs. For one, Barbara's son delighted in investigating and nearly dissecting insects and other small animals. Even worse, his own father, Brooks, encouraged the boy's tendencies, praising his scientific talent. And that wasn't all. Although Barbara Baklin was nothing if not self-absorbed, even she must have seen that her son was in need of some professional help. Her response was blood-chilling. Instead of taking Tony to therapy, Barbara insisted on pretending everything was fine. In fact, she once proudly showed her dinner guests a series of drawings Tony had done. Their subject matter? Oh, just bloody human figures. And yet, for all that Barbara's relationship with her son was dysfunctional, her marriage was about to reach new levels of horror. For exclusive perks like early access to new videos, priority replies to your comments, and to have your say on future content, consider becoming a Factornate member. On top of that, your support helps keep the channel going. Click the link in the description for more details. In 1954, Barbara and Brooks decided they needed a change. So they packed up their 8-year-old son, Tony, to go live a nomadic existence around Europe. In many ways, it was the kind of wealthy jet-setting life that most people dream of, and Barbara flitted from party to party in a cloud of perfume. Then one day, it all came crashing down. If the Baklins thought that escaping to Europe would help them outrun their marital issues, they were very, very wrong. In the 1960s, while the couple was hosting a party in their Paris apartment, Brooks happened to meet an English diplomat's daughter, who, while strikingly beautiful, was also a full 15 years younger than him. Did this stop him from striking up yet another affair? No, but he didn't stop there. Usually, Brooks had no reason to go flaunting his side pieces around his wife. But this time, it was different. In the warm light of his lusty affair, Brooks realized how desperately unhappy he was in his marriage and asked Barbara outright for a divorce. He probably wasn't expecting a calm conversation, but nothing could have prepared him for what he got. Barbara, as vain and insecure as she always had been, was devastated that a woman so much younger than her had caught her husband's eye. Her reaction threw everyone into a tailspin. On the brink of her sanity, Barbara tried to take her own life. It was heartbreaking, but it was also effective. Brooks quickly ended his affair and all his thoughts of separation. Although Barbara narrowly managed to cling on to her husband, it was far from happily ever after for this dysfunctional couple. Then they had another curve while coming. In 1967, the Baklins were still bouncing around the continent when their son Tony, now 20 years old, met a bisexual Australian bad boy by the name of Jake Cooper. Cooper was far from the sort of man the Baklins wanted their son to hang out with, and in a matter of days, their friendship went from uncomfortable to scandalous. Besides his pronounced psychological issues, Tony had also grown up in a posh isolation, so he needed very little encouragement to let loose with Jake Cooper. Not only did the two begin a steamy affair, Cooper also convinced his upper-class beau to travel to Morocco with him, buy hallucinogens, and have a grand old time rebelling against Mommy and Daddy. Until that is, Barbara found out. Apparently high society matrons have eyes everywhere because Barbara soon heard from one of her friends that her precious little Tony was on a psychedelic romp with his beefcake male lover. Now, this news would have set many an uptight mother, but Barbara took it to the next level. She immediately drove across Europe, set on bringing Tony back to Mommy Dearest in Switzerland. Spoiler, this was a total disaster. Although Barbara managed to track down Tony easily enough and stuff him back into the car with her, her plan soon took a dark turn. They got stopped at the French border, and Tony realized that he didn't have his passport with him. The problem even beautiful Barbara couldn't flirt her way out of, and she and Tony ended up in the slammer that night. Then, after this brush with the law, Barbara Baklin's life really went off the rails. As we'll see, Barbara never fully accepted Tony, so she was especially thrilled when he stopped hanging around Jake Cooper and his hippie friends, and instead brought home a real live girl. Tony's new love interest was a French beauty named Sylvie, but she was a little too much of a hit with the family. Even after Tony began his relationship with Sylvie, the Baklin's home life turned downright scandalous. Brooks Baklin, still desperately unhappy in his marriage to Barbara, began an affair himself with Sylvie. Yeah, that's right. Brooks started cheating on his wife with his son's girlfriend. In early 1968, Barbara found out about Brooks's affair with young Sylvie, and the discovery sent her into yet another terrifying, depressive episode as she tried once more to take her own life. This time, though, it had the opposite effect. Brooks filed for divorce once and for all, then he really twisted the knife. Brooks didn't simply divorce Barbara. He also got with Sylvie after, actually marrying the girl, and having another son with her. It must have been the worst outcome that Barbara could have predicted, and she was at sea for many long months following the split. As her marriage to Brooks disintegrated, Barbara's relationship with her son grew intensely alarming. By this time, the adult Tony hadn't grown out of his childhood creepiness. If anything, his issues had just gotten worse. He was cold towards his mother and prone to rude outbursts and aggression. Not that he had much support. Perhaps most unsettling of all this is the fact that although Tony was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia and paranoid tendencies, this diagnosis didn't do him any good. When the doctors first gave the Baklins the news, Brooks Baklins actually refused to let the boys seek any psychiatric help, all because he thought psychiatrists were immoral. Barbara was so obsessed with maintaining her picture-perfect facade that there was almost nothing about her troubled son that she wouldn't wave away. Emphasis on almost. Barbara did have one sticking point: Tony's homosexuality, or possibly his bisexuality. In fact, it bothered Barbara so much she went to chilling lengths to change him. While some mothers use conversion therapy to fix their gay sons, Barbara had her own twisted methods. Reportedly, she started hiring female escorts to come in and try to seduce her son over to the straight side. To Barbara's great disappointment, Tony didn't even bite once, forcing her to move on to even more disturbing tactics. Barbara had always been brash and flirtatious, and she had always been very close to Tony, but people soon realized she was starting to use her feminine ways on her own son. One day, Barbara even let an excruciating awkward detail slip. At a dinner event that Barbara attended with Tony in Paris, the socialite apparently swanned in, sat down, and titted to her companions. "Oh, what a wonderful day it has been. Tony and I spend the entire morning lying in bed reading the papers." While Tony only smirked at this bizarre overshare, the rest of the guests got very uncomfortable, very fast, if they only knew. In 1968, Barbara's already dramatic life came to a screeching climax. Although some of the details are necessarily hazy, it was in Mallorca that Barbara and Tony likely began a physical, incestuous relationship after a series of intimate candlelit dinners. The details are skin-crawling. Sickeningly, Barbara supposedly believed she was doing Tony a favor by finally showing him what a real woman could do. Of course, it didn't take long for her horrific plan to unravel. Tony and Barbara were reportedly shameless about their relationship while in Mallorca, treating it more like an open secret than a skeleton in a closet. But all of that changed once they got back from their vacation. Tony grew utterly distraught and even more unhinged than usual. So much so that he checked himself into a psychiatric ward. Barbara wasn't much better off either. In 1969, just months after her taboo affair with her own son began, Barbara met the trending New York art curator Samuel Adams Green, who was nearly 2 decades her junior. With her life still spinning around her, Barbara quickly became obsessed with Green, introducing him to Tony after mere weeks of dating. If that sounds like a bad idea, that's because it definitely was. When Barbara first introduced Green to her son, she pulled her old classic move and had Tony show her new lover his artwork. Green, an experienced eye in the artwork, wasn't exactly blown over by Tony's macabre drawings of bleeding people. Even worse, Green broke off their relationship after just 6 weeks. And remember, Barbara didn't take breakups well. She refused to get over Green, and months later, she tried to get him back with one very ill-advised seduction move. With snow on their ground, she dressed up in nothing but a fur coat, walked across Central Park in bare feet, and once she made it to her ex-boyfriend's apartment, banged on Green's door while begging him to take her back. Sadly, it didn't work, and Barbara only ended up feeling more pathetic. By 1972, Barbara and Tony still hadn't managed to keep themselves away from each other, and were living together in London, England, although we don't know for sure if they carried on their grim bedroom relationship into the new decade. The damage was very much done. Tony was slipping further into paranoia and displaying some new unsettling symptoms on top of his many other issues. While Barbara frittered away most of her evenings at parties, Tony started to regress back into a childlike state. There are reports of him sitting on the floor of their luxury flat, finger painting on his clothes and decorating his shoes with the kind of gold stars teachers give to very good boys. Yet for all that seemed innocent, Tony's dark side was also growing. Tony was still susceptible to intensely violent moods, and he and Barbara would get into such massive fights that their well-to-do neighbors resorted to calling the authorities multiple times. Then Tony snapped. One day, officers found him in the street, carrying a knife and raving about his desire to annihilate all women. But he had even more disturbing acts in store. In late July 1972, Tony's rage grew to epic proportions, and he suddenly tried to throw Barbara onto the busy street outside of their London penthouse. Luckily, Barbara's friend rescued her, but the incident was serious enough that officers actually arrested Tony for attempted murder. That was a close one, right? Well, just wait. Disturbingly, throughout all these warnings, Barbara still refused to believe there was anything fundamentally wrong with her son. After the traffic incident, she didn't even press charges. And although Tony had a brief stay in a psychiatric hospital following the attack, Barbara quickly took him out and put her precious boy back in her care. This would prove to be a fatal error. Although Tony was out of the psychiatric hospital, Barbara did at least pay a therapist to visit her son at home. After one intense session with the boy, the doctor gave Barbara some disturbing news. At the end of October 1972, he warned her that he believed Tony was capable of murder. Barbara dismissed the accusation one last fatal time. On November 17, 1972, Barbara was making dinner in her family flat when she got into yet another argument with Tony. This time, about a friend Tony wanted to invite over who she didn't want to see. This small spat pushed Tony over the edge, and he finally made good on all of the dark omens. He took a kitchen knife, charged towards his mother, and stabbed her directly in the heart. Barbara's end was instant, and she probably had no time to even understand what was going on. But Tony's response was so disturbing, it's impossible to forget. The Baklin's heir was so out of it, he ordered a Chinese takeout meal directly after slaying his mother, and was still munching on it when he calmly called the authorities to turn himself in. When Tony attacked his mother that night, she was only 51 years old, but he was just 25 himself. He was all too clearly mentally ill while locked up before trial. He would often ask visitors how his mother was. Accordingly, the courts felt immense pity for him, and a judge decided to institutionalize him at a high-security psychiatric ward, rather than give him jail time. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of Tony or his wrath. After just 6 years of the institution, a group of friends successfully petitioned the courts to release Tony into the world again, and he stepped out on July 21, 1980. His first move was bone-chilling. He flew to New York City, posted up with his 87-year-old maternal grandmother, and just 6 days after he won his freedom, stabbed her 8 times with a kitchen knife. Thankfully, Barbara's elderly mother got luckier than Barbara herself, and she survived her grandson's vicious attack. The same luck didn't hold for Tony, though. The authorities threw him into Rikers Island to wait another trial, but before he could go through, Tony took matters into his own hands. Officers found his cold body in his cell on March 20, 1981. Today, Barbara Baklin's dark story lives on in tell-all books like Savage Grace, which describes her relationship with both Brooks and Tony through the people who were close to the family. This then became a 2007 film starring Julianne Moore, but the attention these works received also brought out one crucial detail about Barbara's life that might change everything. When her former lover Sam Green saw the film, he came out with a shocking revelation. According to Green, Barbara and Tony didn't have an inappropriate relationship at all. Instead, Green believes Barbara bluffed about the taboo affair in order to gain attention. As he wrote, "I think she simply enjoyed shocking people. True or not, we may never know the whole story." If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to stay in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.